absolutely love the Sundays when my sermon is pretty much done in the story for all ages, which is exactly what happened today. And often Hannah, and with the assistance of Jan, they managed to explain things in so much of a better way, an understandable way, a more interesting way that makes me feel like I might be lacking. But I will do my best to keep your attention in talking about our UUA 2021 General Assembly. My topic today is Hot Topics and Unitarian Universalism. So you can tell I'm trying really hard to make this material exciting. Because honestly, this is important. You might not really understand or have an idea of how a report on a governing body can have enough spiritual relevance for a Sunday morning. But here in Outpost, Corpus Christi, Texas, it's easy to forget, or at least minimize, the fact that we are part of this bigger interdependent whole. We are not the only Unitarian Universalists in the world. So if you're a seasoned UU, it's always good to be reminded of the unique and wonderful things that make our faith tradition so special, and the fact that we are connected to many others. And if you're new to Unitarian Universalism, I hope you'll gain a better idea of how this unconventional religion works, because the way it works is directly related to our religious values. So the next obvious question is, what is General Assembly, also known as GA? Well, it's the largest annual gathering of UUs. This year, there were over 4,200 registrants, including over 2,200 delegates, representing 656 congregations from 49 states, the District of Columbia, Canada, Mexico, and the Philippines. And of course, at this meeting, the work of governance is done, including debating issues and voting. But it's also time of big worship services, lectures, workshops, and just a general celebration of all things UU. Now, this year's gathering was more solemn than most, not only because it was the second all-virtual GA, the second year running. It was held in recognition of the widespread trauma inflicted by the COVID-19 pandemic. It was also in recognition of the ongoing murders of Black people and other people of color by police. All of this was emphasized in a report given by our president, the Reverend Dr. Susan Frederick Gray. I always enjoy her president's reports because they are also like very inspiring, inspirational sermons with a lot of really important information. And she acknowledged the trauma that we've all experienced in the past year, including the January attempt to overthrow the largest voter turnout election in U.S. history, the persistent reality of police violence disproportionately taking the lives of Black Americans, mass shootings, hate crimes, and xenophobic attacks against anyone perceived as other. So she outlined 3 core priorities of the Unitarian Universalist Association. And if you're wondering what the association is about or what it does, their mission is to equip congregations for health and vitality, to support and train lay and professional leaders, and to advance UU values in the world. So the first priority she talked about was pandemic and post-pandemic response. Unfortunately, the post-pandemic part might be a little premature. But she noted the health recommendations that the UUA provided to its congregations. And I have to say, as a minister in Corpus Christi, Texas, that having those recommendations made it a lot easier to do the right thing, right, with the backing of our national association. We were able to take actions by closing down that saved lives, prevented illness, while other religious institutions locally were in complete and utter denial. Unfortunately, that denial does not seem to be disappearing at all. It seems to be continuing. As we move forward in this, the UUA is actually recommending that congregations do something called multi-platform ministry, which is a fancy way of saying we're going to do some things in person and some things online. And she's urged our congregations to keep priorities of care, of inclusion, and leaning into mission. She also encouraged us to be open to experimentation, flexibility, and above all, patience. As I stand here doing our first live stream only service, I can relate to that. I can relate to the fact that we have to experiment and be patient. Here in our congregation, we will continue to consider and assess the safety of in-person gatherings and to make church more accessible to those who are not online. The second UUA priority, and is one that's expected to continue, and we've talked about this in prior Zoom services, it's implementing the recommendations of the Commission on Institutional Change. This is another kind of long and boring sounding name, but this is basically the body that created the Widening the Circle report. That's a report I preached on several times during Zoom services. And it is really groundbreaking in talking about all of the many, many ways that Unitarian Universalism needs to be more inclusive, widening the circle of inclusion. So this commission that created this report, their charge was to conduct an audit of white privilege and structural racism and white supremacy culture within the UUA. That's not just the UUA headquarters in Boston. This is throughout its congregations, its related organizations. So I'm going to invite you going forward to stay tuned for more services focused on this vast amount of information and recommendations covered in this report. The President also shared what the UUA is doing in response to this report. I'm going to be really brief here and then go into detail about one of these things much later because I think it's the most important one, or the one of greatest interest. The UUA board has charged the Article 2 Study Commission to engage our congregations in theological discernment around our principles, purpose, and core values. Now that is a really big sentence that's going to take a while to unpack, and I'm going to do that later and break it down for you. But I'm going to run through a couple of other things the UUA has been doing first. They've engaged new initiatives to support lay leaders, retooling leadership training, creating networks of lay leaders, and actually including circles for Black, Indigenous, people of color lay leaders. They are launching a conflict engagement team to help congregations to build skills for understanding how race, gender identity, and power impact conflict and create tools. They will create tools to help leaders intervene sooner in conflicts before they escalate. That sounds like a good idea to me. The UUA is making new investments in youth ministry. They're sponsoring a new national youth ministry network called YUUP. I don't know if that's pronounced Yoop or Yup. I will try to find out. But this will actually be a youth-led organization supported by adults from multiple regions. And the UUA is also bringing a stronger lens of equity, accountability, and strategy to its publications and communications. The publication UU World has a new editorial board. The Skinner House Books has a new equity and accountability panel. That's a publishing house owned by the UUA. And the UUA's flagship publisher, Beacon Press, there's really nothing new there, but it's important to remind you that this press, their list of Black, Indigenous, and people of color authors, both historic and current, is really shaping national conversations on race and equity. Who knew the UUs were part of that? So together, the UUA and Beacon Press are discovering the ways their work and mission can support and benefit each other. And of course, the President shared efforts for sustaining culture change within the UUA as a workplace, calling it essential to being an organization where people of all identities can thrive. And she reported that the UUA Senior Executive Advisory Team is now 66% people of color. That is the top echelon of UUA leadership is now 66% people of color. And the full UUA staff has grown in diversity to 32% people of color. The third priority of the UUA is strengthening justice, leadership, and organizing capacity, strengthening justice, leadership, and organizing capacity. And the president gave a shout out to UU the Vote. This was a UU-led initiative that engaged the nation at a really critical time, right? When democracy was directly under, and voting was under unprecedented attack. And UU the Vote got out more than 5,000 volunteers. Over 450 congregations participated. UU the Vote registered more than 10,000 new voters, sent more than 1 million texts, more than 1 million postcards, and made more than 600,000 phone calls. I made a few of those, I must say. All told, UU the Vote contacted more than 3 million voters. Special efforts in Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Georgia not only helped voter participation, they helped make sure every vote counted. The UU the Vote also gained national attention. It was recognized by the business publication called Fast Company as a finalist for its World Changing Ideas Award in the Enduring Impact category. So the president also said that UU the Vote had a spiritual impact because it was a brutal year beset with loss. And participating in UU the Vote served as a lifeline to many. It nurtured, she said, the kind of joy and hope that grows from struggle and solidarity, and that in itself was life-saving. So the president concluded her report with the now familiar phrase, which I really love. That is, this is no time for a casual faith. And she added, this is a time for audacious love that is inextricably linked to courageous action. She continued, and this is no time to go it alone. We belong to each other, and we need one another to survive. Covenant, honoring our interconnectedness, creating more intentional and ever-widening practices of belonging. This is how we survive. In this unimaginably difficult year, we have come to more deeply understand the gift of being a covenantal, a relational faith. She says, I remain incredibly grateful for this faith. Thank you to all of you for the ways you continue to say yes to this life-affirming, life-saving, compassionate, and prophetic faith. So that's the end quote from Reverend Dr. Susan Frederick Gray, the president of the Unitarian Universalist Association. So covering GA on a Sunday service is really hard. I can't even hit the highlights. It's just too many. But there are two more things I'd like to tell you about. The first one I'm going to be kind of brief with. The second one I'll go into more detail. But so first, the first thing that's more brief I wanted to tell you about, because it has some local interest here. So near the end of GA, there's an opportunity for the Assembly to vote to adopt something called a responsive resolution. A responsive resolution is what you might guess. It's a resolution that is created in response to a report that was delivered earlier in the General Assembly. It's a chance for the Assembly to give feedback to the reports. And I'm going to tell you about one of these resolutions because it was sponsored by the Young Adult Caucus at GA, in which our own Hannah Kiley was actively engaged. She has about one more year before she's no longer a young adult, so I think she's making the most of it. Hannah was on screen before the Assembly. She addressed the Assembly speaking passionately in favor of this resolution from the young adults that was a response to the report of the UUA Common Endowment. And I also have to say that our endowment funds is invested with the UUA Common Endowment. This resolution passed with 80% in favor. And what was this resolution? Well, this resolution asked that the Common Endowment Fund divest from fossil fuels, pipelines, and other institutions that invest in them. They also requested that young adults be involved in related discussions. So I'm really proud of Hannah. I hope you are too. It was really cool to see her on the big screen participating so fully in our democratic process. Now, the last topic I'm going to share today at a greater length goes well beyond General Assembly. It goes to the core of who we are as Unitarian Universalists. It goes straight to the heart of our religion's principles and sources and values. literally, absolutely literally. I mentioned earlier something called the Article 2 Study Commission. Now this is a really boring name, but behind this boring name of the Article 2 Study Commission is a very exciting project that has potential to make a really big impact on Unitarian Universalism. So Article 2 refers to the section of the UUA bylaws. I know bylaws, stay awake on me. It refers to the section of the UUA bylaws where our principles and sources are, right? Our 7 principles talked about earlier, and also our 6 sources. That's pretty much almost all of what is in Article 2. Right now, Article 2 states 7 principles and 6 sources, and that's what serves as our foundation of modern Unitarian Universalism. Well, every 15 years, it's kind of written in the book that we can change our principles if we want to. Every 15 years, our principles and sources can be reviewed and revised, and then if the revisions are accepted, they're voted on at our General Assembly and they are adopted. Because we are a living tradition, not everything was set in stone 2,000 years ago, it's written in that we are supposed to evolve and change as the times change. And that's what this Article 2 Commission is tasked with, is speaking to UU constituencies to ultimately propose what our principles and sources will look like in the future. That is, if what they come up with is agreed to enough to pass at a future General Assembly. So throughout this past GA, the Study Commission engaged attendees in its review of the current principles and sources. They had workshops, they had virtual exhibits, and they had a presentation and a discussion during one of the big general sessions. So they are well on their way at working on this. This commission is set to present their draft statement of new principles and sources at next year's General Assembly. So that's the end of June 2022. If that goes well, and that's liked, that's kind of a vote of confidence, that's the General Assembly saying, hey, we really like where you're going with this, they will continue to revise it for another year and get more feedback. And then at GA 2023, it will actually go up for a vote to be permanently adopted. This is kind of a big deal because our principles and sources have not been updated in a really big way since 1985. I just found out that's 2 years before Hannah was born. There was another full revision in 2009 that was actually declined by the General Assembly in a narrow vote. I remember that. It was kind of disappointing, and the changes were not all that radical. Anyway, so this commission got together because the UUA Board of Trustees gave them a charge. Boards can charge groups to do things. And in this formal written charge, thought through very carefully by the Board of Trustees, they provided the commission some guidance. And what they say in their guidance says a lot. It says where they would really like things to go, and I happen to agree with it. So I'm going to tell you some of the things that the board is charging this commission to do. This is the board's kind of vision for how they want to see the principles and sources potentially change. They tell the commission that proposed changes should articulate core UU theological values. The board believes, and this goes back to our story earlier, that one core theological value shared widely among UUs is love. Love, the word love does not appear in our 7 principles as they are right now. Did you know that? I think that's really fascinating, even though we have it on the yellow shirts like Jan showed us. They cite the same study that we heard about in the story, that UUs rank loving as an instrumental value and mature love as an ultimate value, not a means to an end, but an end in and of itself. And this was in a survey, UUs valued love in a survey more highly than respondents from other groups, other religious groups and other non-religious groups. We were more excited about love than any other people surveyed, okay? I think that says something, right? We really are the love people, and maybe we are living up to what our shirts say. They go on to say that Dr. Cornel West says that justice is what love looks like in public. That's one of my favorite quotes. The board goes on to tell the commission, our commitment to personal, institutional, and cultural change rooted in anti-oppression, anti-racism, and multiculturalism values and practices love in action, this Cornel West love in action, and should be centered in any revision of the principles. So the board is saying, love. Take a look at love. They're screaming, love, don't miss this. They go on to say the new principles should guide us in the transformation of ourselves, our communities, and our faith into active networks of collective care, restoration, and justice. They say the principles you will prepare should be a living document that challenges Unitarian Universalists to place the liberation in all its dimensions of all at the center of our faith. Okay, liberation, that's another key word they're asking the commission to consider. Finally, they say, the principles should lead us into the second quarter of the 21st century while honoring the historic roots of our liberal progressive faith. I think what they're saying there is, yeah, we want you to be big and bold, but don't forget our history, don't throw that all out the window. The commission is instructed to include in its considerations and deliberations the clear call at GA 2017 for the inclusion of another principle, explicitly calling us to be committed to active anti-racism. This is the proposed 8th principle that Hannah and Jan told us about in the story. So they're also saying, hey, you've got to consider that too. So the commission is charged with reviewing all sections of Article 2, and this is where the board is telling them, they're kind of their general boundaries. They say they're free to revise and replace or restructure them as needed to meet the objectives stated above. They say there is nothing sacred about the number of principles or sources, nor their specific wordings, nor in the way the whole article is laid out. They say we encourage creativity. The board would also like to see an Article 2 that is inspirational, memorable, and poetic. Now, our 7 principles were written by committee, and they just do not float off the tongue in beautiful language. The ideas behind them are beautiful, the language is not. I think that's what they're saying by, we'd like them to be more flowy and beautiful to say, and that would probably make them more memorable as well. They say the language should be inclusive and welcoming and explicitly anti-racist. They particularly urge the commission to review the sources, our 6 sources, all of the traditions we draw from in Unitarian Universalism. So they want a good look at the sources. And this is really funny. They want the commission to consider the inclusion of Unitarianism and Universalism in the sources. It is true, we have 6 sources, and not a one of them mentions Unitarianism or Universalism. Oops. So that makes sense to me. They say, in addition, there have been energetic discussions about how other faith traditions, such as Buddhism and Islam, among others, might be included or put on footings more equal to those of Christianity and Judaism. Christianity and Christian and Judaic traditions have their own source, right? And what they're saying here is that maybe we need to include more. Buddhism and Islam, they're just kind of covered on the source about world religions, but Christianity and Judaism are kind of given their own source as a highlight, so they're asking, maybe you want to rethink that. So that is the summary of what this commission, I think, is really going to be working with and struggling with in the coming years to come up with something. They're going to continue to meet with UU stakeholders to develop a revised set of principles and purposes, principles and sources. And they're allowed to take it as far as they want to. It'll be interesting to see how much they run with it and how much they feel comfortable changing, or if they feel like they can't change too much because people might not be happy if it changes too much. So I personally am really curious and excited to see what they come up with, and I hope you are too, because this is something that will affect us all. So if you remember anything I've shared today, I hope you'll remember that ours is a living tradition. It's one of the unique and wonderful things about us. Revelation is not sealed, revelation is ongoing. We have the power to learn, evolve, and adapt. It is something that is so special and I believe so much needed in our world today in terms of religious perspective. I mean, just in the last few years, think of all we've learned about the imperative of anti-racism and anti-oppression and multiculturalism. whether it's through the police killings of black people, the uprising of white supremacist groups, or, simply kind of turning and looking at ourselves to understand white supremacy culture, this white supremacy culture that exists in our association, in our congregations, and even in ourselves for those of us who happen to be white. So I hope you will never forget that ours is a living faith that's structured to grow and change as our understanding of the world grows and changes. And that change process, it's rooted in democratic ideals. That's another thing lacking in some religions, I must say. And that is something rare. And that is something we should never, ever take for granted. May it be so.